Well, I'm not big on huge introductions, so I think we'll probably jump right in. We're so fortunate to have Senator Eric Koch here with us today, who has been involved in energy, technology, and many other important policies in Indiana. Thank you so much for being here, Senator Koch.
Thank you, Lesley.
And Representative Ed Soliday, who was elected in 2006, I believe, is that right? And has also been involved in many of these same issues. These two work together. In fact, Representative Soliday was telling me this morning that a lot of lobbyists, a lot of interest groups think they can play the two of these guys off each other, but in fact, they work pretty closely together. Is that right?
Yeah, that is true.
100%.
Well, we wanted to start off talking about broadband. It feels like at almost every one of our technology breakfasts, we end up talking some about broadband. Last fall, the Biden administration approved Indiana's initial proposal for broadband equity, access, and development, the BEAD program, as we heard Steve mention earlier. And that's a big federal initiative, $42.45 billion for states. Indiana received $868 million. That's on top of $600 million that the legislature allocated for broadband through its next level connections and Indiana connectivity programs. And the companies are putting in more. Why is this such an intractable problem?
I guess I can start. I think, first of all, the BEAD program is interesting, but the current administration is just marvelously organized. So they've expressed some concerns about the BEAD program, but no one really knows where they're going with it. One of the interesting things is the BEAD program was pretty narrowly defined in how you could spend the money. And it prescribed you had to have union labor, you had to have all kinds of things. And pretty much the satellite network was only to be used in very, very specific cases. Now we have Elon Musk there, and there is some question whether some of that money is going to be reallocated, whether some of the restrictions are going to be changed. We're waiting to see. We've been really blessed in the state with, they're no longer utilities, but telecoms who have invested heavily in the state themselves. And they will probably continue to go forward. But one of the real difficulties, there are two real difficulties in my mind. Mr. Rogers mentioned a couple. One is the take rate. In a lot of areas, the take rate is only like 40%.
And what do you mean by that? Tell us what you mean by that.
The technology is available, but people don't decide to take it. And you can get broadband access in practically free in the urban areas if you're economically challenged. In the rural areas, it's costing us $7,800 per house just to reach the home. So it's pretty expensive, and there are those folks who say, well, if only 40% of the people are taking it, why are we spending taxpayer money? But I think Senator Koch can expand further. We were one of the first states to invest early. I think our first was about $200 million. Mm-hmm. So we believe in the program, we believe in distributing it, but it's now convincing people that this is good for them and figuring out exactly what the federal government is going to do with BEAD. I'm convinced private enterprise, if it doesn't, they cut back BEAD, private enterprise will fill the gap. They will meet the market demand.
Senator Koch, are you concerned at all about the Trump administration pulling back on some of this funding?
Well, who knows at this point? Time will tell. On the take rate, the take rate is a function of adoption. And adoption is how relevant a customer finds broadband to their daily lives, right? And I think, as unfortunate as COVID was in so many ways, I think that experience did help drive adoption as schools were going to e-learning at home, remote workers at home, and applications like that a decade ago we would have never really even conceived, I believe and I hope are going to drive that take rate, which in turn will lower the cost and hopefully speed at which broadband can be deployed. I'm one of the legislators who represent a rural district many of whose families would go to the McDonald's parking lot and use the Wi-Fi for homework, or job seekers going to the local library, and there'd be lines 6 deep of people wanting to use a limited number of public computers at the library. And so I'm very optimistic, and we're on our last round of our next level broadband grants. We are I'll talk in a minute maybe a little bit about Senate Bill 502, but I'm very optimistic about the future.
Do you feel like is there enough money in the system right now to take care of providing access to people who need it? You guys have spent a lot of money.
Excluding BEAD?
Say that again.
With or without BEAD?
You tell me.
I think with BEAD as projected, that would be, my view, plenty of money.
Yeah. Well, I do know that U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said he's going to rip out what he called pointless requirements that were inserted into the federal BEAD program. Do you think that will make the program more effective in Indiana?
I think the issue was, it was so complex when it was firsthand. It was 100 pages just to apply for the thing. Anytime and it may make it more easily distributed, but anytime you mess with these processes, you extend the time it takes to get things done. So they may make the program more understandable, more usable, but the rewrite time, and then I talked to Steve Cox, the Indiana administration's director of these kind of things, and he said, we're ready to go. We're ready. Senator Koch and I have prided ourselves, be ready to pivot whoever is president, whether it's energy, whether it's telecommunications, or whether it's water. So the fear I have, if they do a major rewrite, how long is it going to take us, and what hoop do we have to jump through to get approved?
What kind of legislation are we seeing right now that might impact this program?
Well, I think back, I've been here since 2002. Chairman Soliday came shortly thereafter. We've been around, and in those early years, our phones would ring off the hook with people wanting broadband. We get much less, almost none of those kind of calls at R, which tells me we're getting out there. During that period of time in the mid to late 2000s, many legislators filed broadband bills every session. I mean, more than you can count. Everybody had their own broadband bill. So we see much less of that. In fact, I think this session, the only broadband bill I can think of is Senator Andy Zay's Senate Bill 502, Senator Zay's from Huntington. That bill deals with the issue of pole attachments, and we're seeing some permitting delays by pole owners, and I acknowledge this is a very complex subject, right? And there are two sides to this, but we're hearing stories of permits sitting there for 300 to 400 days. And there are reasons for that. And so Senator Zay came forward with a very extensive bill with notices and duties and obligations and timetables with very good intentions. I thought it was maybe a little too bureaucratic, and we did in committee what's called a strip and insert, which is a procedure where you just remove entirely the contents of the filed bill and replace it with an amendment with Senator Zay's cooperation. And that bill is now a reporting requirement where the broadband providers will report to Steve Cox's office, the broadband office, quarterly on the date of their permit application, the pole owner, and the county that it's in. And then that office can look at those numbers, and if there is a problem or appears to be a problem, kind of mediate a solution to that. Because it is a complex issue. It's a pole attachment issue that Representative Soliday kind of became our institutional expert on a few years ago, and with a very extensive bill. So, and the concern was some of these grants have timetables, and if it goes on too long, then the provider runs the risk of losing the grant. So that was a problem Senator Zay was trying to solve. and hopefully in its current form, if there is an issue out there, that we'll see some improvement.
Is there bid? Go ahead.
We'll see where we go with that bill. I have encouraged both sides that business should solve business problems and not count on government to solve them. So we'll, in the broadband world, we've had a number of meetings that went till midnight in my office where we came to a conclusion before someone passed out. So we'll see where we go with this.
Again, if you have a question, you can scan the QR code on your table there to send us a question. I wanted to know whether you have any concerns that we're spending too much of our money, our energy on fiber, on broadband itself, and not thinking enough about satellite technology, or the fact that in many areas people use their phone as their hotspot. Is technology changing in any way that the system needs to be rethought?
Well, first of all, technology is always changing. With satellite, I said to my wife, now that we have a new administration, heavily invested in satellite, take a look at the moon tonight, because you'll never see it again after they've loaded all these satellites into space they need. There are latency issues. There are things, fiber, in my mind, before we walk away from it, you'll hear later about quantum. It's how clean can we keep the line? How can we boost the signal? Maybe for the person who uses their phone to get their email, but when we're talking about heavy-duty computing, I think fiber is going to be here for a long time. And so, again, I think you need someone with more technical expertise than I have. Maybe Senator Koch can expand, but I think we're going to be using fiber for a long time, particularly in the business and research world.
I think he just anointed you as the technology guy.
I don't know about that, but we are hearing a lot about Starlink, and even before that brand became so widely known, there was always some thought out there that the last inch of the last mile might be some form of satellite, and so we'll see when we get there.
You mentioned the quantum computing issue. Later on, we're going to have Tom Dockage up here talking about that. Representative Soliday, you have some legislation that has to do with quantum computing. Tell us about that and what your goal is.
We have passed it out of the House. It's over to Senator Koch right now. It has a lot of potential. Believe it or not, Richard Feynman first suggested quantum computing in 1951 or 81, I guess it was 1981. So, but technology moves like this. It doesn't move linearly. There have been a number of breakthroughs. If this is going where I think it is, I served 12 years at the National Academy of Sciences on the Aeronautics and Space Engineering Board, and there were algorithms that would take a week to run. Quantum will run them in 10 minutes, and much more error-free. When you watch the weather, you'll notice they have the European model and then they have the US model, and they diverge significantly because in Monte Carlo multivariate modeling, just change one input a little bit and the output changes significantly. Well, quantum has significant capabilities in error checking. It has significant capabilities that will probably reduce what we're asking AI to do. So that whole world of AI, and I'll get in a lot of trouble saying this with so many AI people here, that as quantum becomes available, that dependence on AI, that is going to change. So it may change what networks look like and so forth. We're seeing the data center world, that market starting to compress, and we're starting to see people come out of it. But I have a lot of hope for quantum. On the practical side, quantum requires a booster cleanup of the fiber every 50 miles, which means a 20,000 square foot building. And we have Citizens Against Hershey bars, Citizens Against Pipelines, Citizens Against Data Centers. All we need is one county right now to block one of those buildings, and we have a problem completing the link from Fort Wayne loop down to Crane. Others, I think, will be entering this quantum world. Mr. Dockage is on the point in Indiana. Illinois has a system. I think it has huge potential. But again, are we there yet? We'll see.
And the legislation provides some tax incentives, is that
Yes,
correct?
it's basically the same tax incentive package we gave to data centers. It made us very attractive. This should make us attractive for quantum computing.
Senator Koch, the bill's in your court now. What's going to happen?
Well, we're going to need energy to power all of this. And this session, I think we have moving 4 bills dealing with small modular reactors, 3 Senate bills and a House bill. A decade ago, you couldn't even have that conversation in Indiana because of the legacy of 3 Mile Island, and then along comes Marble Hill. And if you had the nerve to file a bill, it wouldn't even move. And just how far we have come now, it's taken 2 generations, to get there. But we're going to need nuclear energy. We're going to need it in the form of small modular reactors. It is on the horizon. It is coming. And Indiana, not just this session, but in earlier sessions together, we've really laid the groundwork for this so that when those are ready, Indiana is ready. And we're taking some steps this year to position us even better for that.
Just to build on that a little, I've had 2 companies come to me. There are incentives in House Bill 1007 for small modular reactor construction. One of those companies, which I won't mention, but a fairly big company with heavy investment in Indiana, is already building an SMR factory in Europe. They're beginning another one in England. He came to me, and my former boss was CEO of this company, and he always drops his name, which I'm like, he's riding a horse out in Montana. He doesn't even know I exist anymore. But we have now formed a group. I try to put together little think tank groups of people smarter than me that are willing to stand up to my overbearing personality. So we've said, what education do we need? Purdue has an excellent nuclear engineering program, but what about the other workers? If that factory comes to Indiana, that's 500 jobs, all over $100,000 a year. So what do we need to equip these people? So we put together a little think tank group of educators and so forth. What do we need to be workforce prepared to welcome these folks? Plus, we've put a significant incentive in to come to our state with SMR manufacturing.
We jumped into SMR here, and of course, we're talking about SMR. We're talking about nuclear again, in part because there is more demand for electricity with the advent of AI, quantum computing, et cetera. Senator Koch, where do you think we are now in Indiana in terms of whether we can provide enough power for these demands?
I think we can and will if the process is allowed to work. Our utilities undergo a integrated resource planning process every 3 years. It's a 20-year look ahead, lots of stakeholder involvement. We have a commission here in Indiana, which I believe functions very well. So if we let the process work, I think we'll just be just fine.
I think we need to be measured. There are people out there like chickens clucking about the world's coming to an end, we're running out of energy. Our utilities are not stupid. They have staffs that do planning and engineering folks. And if 1007, we built on, Senator Koch and I did the 5 pillars after 4 years of task forces, over 200 witnesses. We have put some things in place that say, if you are a high demand user, you're going to have to buy part of the risk. Not long ago, I won't mention any counties, we were being beat up that we needed 5 gigawatts of electricity within 4 years. When it turned out what they really needed was 1 gigawatt over 20 years. One is water into wine, one is like rolling out of bed in the morning. If we'd have gone down that path, we'd have spent $10 billion of taxpayer money, lost our AAA bond rating, and that company walked when they didn't get the federal grant. We have to be measured. You build it, they come. Remember, you all are going to pay for that if they don't come. The other is not being prepared for growth. So we've tried to walk that center line, build things that encourage. We are not in an energy crisis in Indiana. There's a challenge where demand exceeds supply, but we already are meeting margin requirements. So I would just suggest to all of you, avoid the hyperbole. Let us be measured. Let us meet the demands of, we certainly need to build more. We need to transition, but the world is not coming to an end.
I would have a million questions I could ask you guys, but we have several panels to go, and so thank you so much for talking to us about these tough issues. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lesley.
Thank you, Lesley.